In this tutorial, we're going to learn how to use the Save Output to CSV plugin for the Butter text analysis software. What this plugin will do is create a CSV file on our hard drive that contains the output created by other plugins within Butter. This is probably the most important plugin in the entire program, so it's important to understand how to use it. Now this plugin is special in a couple of different ways. It can take two different input types, output arrays and strings, and each of these corresponds to a common way that you will need to use this plugin, or that most people will need to use this plugin. I'll cover each of these in turn, starting with the output array input type. Now if you go through and look at other plugins, you'll notice that their output types are often the output array. So things like average word vector, content coding, readability scores, all of these plugins generate the output array data type. You don't need to know exactly what this means. You can think of an output array as essentially a row of data. And so, if we run plugins that calculate scores, we want to take that data and save it out to a file somewhere. And that's what the Save Output to CSV plugin will do for us. So I'll go through a quick example here using TED Talk data. I have a folder full of TXT files, and each one contains a transcript for different TED Talk. So we'll do a quick text analysis of the TED Talk data and save that output to a CSV file. So what we need to do is load those texts in from a folder, and I'll do that using the corresponding plugin. And then we need to tokenize the texts, and let's go ahead and calculate some lexical richness scores. You don't need to know anything about these other plugins right now. There are other tutorial videos for each of these plugins if you want to learn more. Just know that what we're doing is loading in the text files, tokenizing them, and then calculating some scores. Now if we were to run the analysis pipeline as it is right now, it would work. It would load in the texts, it would tokenize them, and would calculate the scores, but nothing would happen with those scores. We wouldn't be able to access that information anywhere because it's not saved to our hard drive. And so we'll attach the Save Output to CSV plugin and go to the plugin settings. In the settings, there are three main sections here. There's the File Encoding section, which allows us to choose what encoding we want to use for a CSV file. This can be a pretty complicated topic, so I won't go into too much detail here. For most people, UTF-8 encoding is perfectly adequate. If you know that you have a different regional encoding, or if you know that you need to be working with a CSV file that has a specific encoding, you can select that using the drop-down menu here. Again, for most people, UTF-8 is completely fine. In this bottom section here, we have CSV delimiter and CSV quote. These correspond to the structure of the CSV file that's going to be generated. This is also kind of a complicated topic. If you're not familiar with CSV files, there are a lot of different pages on the internet that describe their structure and how they work. For most people, a comma as the delimiter will be completely fine. Some countries are more likely to use things like a semicolon or a horizontal bar or the pipe character. For most people, you can get away with using the comma regardless of what your regional standards are, because most programs, things like Excel and SPSS and R, allow you to read in the CS file and specify exactly what is being used as the delimiter and the quote in the structure. So even if you are generating a CSV file that has a different character or a different delimiter than what would normally be used in your region, it'll still be totally usable. And if you go to open your CSV file and the input or the data on the screen is all mashed together or doesn't look quite right, chances are it's a mismatch between what you're using as your delimiter or your quote and what the program that you're using expects. Now the last thing is choosing where we want to generate our CSV file. So we'll go ahead and choose this here, and I'm going to just generate this and name the output file type token ratio. Now what's going to happen when we click save is it's going to go ahead and generate this file right now. So I'm pulling over this folder here so that you can see it show up as soon as I click save. Let's see if I can position this in a better place. There we go. We can see that the file is already generated. Now it's empty, there's nothing in it, but the file is there for us to use. And you can see the size of the output file is 0. I'm going to go ahead and run this for a couple of seconds just so it starts calculating these scores and putting them into the CSV file, and then I'll cancel it pretty quickly. And we can see data has been saved into the CSV file. So that array data type that I mentioned earlier, each one of those arrays is essentially just a row of data that was written to the output file here. Now if you have multiple things that you want to do with data, you're going to need to attach separate save output to CSV plugins for each of these points or each of these chains within your analysis pipeline. So for example, if we want to calculate some additional scores here, let's say we want to calculate some readability scores as well. So these take the string input type, so we'll just attach that here, and then we'll calculate readability scores and lexical richness scores all in the same run. And then we'll attach the save output to CSV plugin here as well. Now if we go to this first one that we already used, we can see that we're saving that original file here. We need to create a new file here as well. Now we want this name to be different than the file that already exists because we don't want two different save output to CSV plugins trying to save data into the same file. Things will get broken or they'll get jumbled up if it tries to write multiple output streams into the same file at the same time. So we're going to create a new file here. We'll just call it readability. And you can see this has been created now as well. And so when we run this, now it's going to load in the texts, tokenize them, calculate lexical richness scores, and then save those into the first CSV file. And then it will take the same texts and calculate readability metrics, and then save that data into a separate CSV file. So I'll do the same thing here and run this plugin really quickly just so you can see it go. And you can see it's moving a lot slower now because we're doing a lot of additional text manipulation and analyses with this extra plugin here. I'll go ahead and cancel this and it should stop in just a second. And if we go back here, we can see that we have these lexical richness scores again. And in this other CSV file, we have the readability scores, things like the Flesch-Kincaid score, reading time, and so forth. Now you notice that these won't always be in the same order. This is because the Save Output to CSV plugin just saves the data as it gets it from the different plugins. So if you need to merge these data sets together for some other type of analysis, you want to make sure that you're matching up the text ID column. So that's the main use for the Save Output to CSV plugin. Now there's one other thing that we can do with this plugin that some people will probably want to do at some point or another. Now if we go back to the save output to CSV plugin, we remember that there's a separate input type that's completely different from output array. This is the string input type, which is essentially just a string of text. What this means is that we can take input from things like the load txt files from folder plugin and pass it directly to the save output to CSV output plugin, like this. So this is useful for if you want to read in a bunch of texts that are contained in separate files and then aggregate them all into a single CSV file. What this also means is that you can read in text, manipulate it in a number of different ways, and then save that manipulated or pre-processed data back out into a CSV file. So if we want to, for example, take those TED Talks, tokenize them, remove a bunch of stop words, and let's say that we also want to lemmatize those texts. So we're reading in the text and then doing a bunch of different pre-processing maneuvers here. We're removing words, we're lemmatizing words, and then we want to save that data back out. What we need to do is take this, which then gets tokenized, and then these tokens keep getting passed between these different plugins. So what we can do is look for a helper like this one, tokens to string, and then attach the save output to CSV plugin to the end of that. So that might be a little confusing. I'll go through this very quickly one more time. We're reading in the texts, tokenizing them, removing stop words, lemmatizing, converting all of that back into a string, and then saving the output to a CSV file. And let's just name this output file preprocessed text. And let's go ahead and give it a run just to see what this output looks like. Preprocessed text. So you can see that we have the text IDs still, but the actual text themselves are now contained in the CSV file. This can be really handy for aggregating a bunch of different files that are scattered in different places into a single file. It can also be really useful if you want to take a bunch of text, do a bunch of processing to it, and then put it back into a CSV file. Here's a brief, simpler example of this. We're just going to load in the text files and then save that text back into a CSV, the same CSV that we were just looking at, but this time we're not doing all of the pre-processing. So this can be a useful and pretty handy way to take a bunch of text that you have spread out all over the place and then put them into a single file. This can be useful if you want to compress this, if you want to zip it up or 7-zip it, or even if you just want to have a single file that can be a bit more efficient to read and write from. And that's it. That's how you use the Save Output to CSV plugin for Butter.